The Federal Reserve consistently and systematically underestimates the interest rate. They've been underestimating the interest rate for many years, if not decades. The reason that they underestimate the interest rate is, one, they don't understand the natural rate of interest. The natural rate of interest is their primary policy guide since they stopped targeting monetary aggregates. Monetary aggregates like M1 or M2 or the money supply was based on Milton Friedman's resuscitation of the quantity theory of money. The quantity theory of money simply states the more money printed, the higher the price level will go. That's no longer theoretically true in the short or intermediate run. You can print a lot of money, but the velocity of money, let's call it the velocity of money, will slow down. So a more innovative theory is interest rate theory, specifically the natural rate of interest. The natural rate of interest is a theoretical rate coming from the theory of Knut Wicksell, 1898. Now, the Federal Reserve misinterprets Wicksell's definition of the natural rate of interest. They also ignore literature subsequent to Wicksell about productivity's influence on the natural rate of interest. So the natural rate of interest is nothing more than the profit rate. When the profits are high, entrepreneurs and individuals have an incentive to borrow at the lowest rate possible. When you see a market rate or the bank rate that is lower than the profit rate, then the incentive there is to expand your business. And this is what has happened for the last, let's say, 20 years, if not longer. The interest rate, known as the Fed funds rate, which other rates follow, is too low because the Federal Reserve creates an empirical estimate of the natural rate of interest, which ignores Wicksell's original definition of the natural rate of interest. That is the profit rate. There's more technical discussions and controversies around this. They call it the marginal productivity of capital. Keynes called it the marginal efficiency of capital. And there's also the interest rate that equates investment and savings. And lastly, the price stabilizing rate, which is the most controversial. Wicksell, in my opinion, never really defined it as the price stabilizing rate. He said prices will stabilize as a consequence of the equilibrium between the market rate and the natural rate. So the new neoclassical synthesis, which was promoted by Michael Woodford in his book Interest in Prices, which is a reinvention of Wicksell's interest in prices, they tried to target the price stabilizing rate, which is an incorrect rate because there's a lot more in the economy that has to go into it. He has some basic simple assumptions, price flexibility and rigidities, and he brings this into an econometric model. He ignores debates in the early 19th century, which really focused on interest and savings inequalities rather than price and wage rigidities. So the consequence of misdefining it is you're going to get a lower policy guide than really should be appropriate. The second component is productivity should be inverse to the price level. When productivity is increasing, more goods and services are produced. When more goods and services are produced, according to the supply and demand laws, the price level should fall. But this is not taken into account. Even Wicksell did not take this into account until 1925, near the end of his life. He made a concession to David Davidson that productivity could affect the aggregate price level, and price level stability might not be the optimal state in the economy. David Davidson, also Eric Landau and Friedrich Hayek echoed this point. So because the Federal Reserve misdefines theoretically the natural rate of interest, their primary policy guide, and they don't understand how productivity can decrease the aggregate price level in equilibrium, the interest rate that we see at the bank, at the Federal Reserve, has been low for 20 years. The implication is, well, the economy is very forgiving. The economy will just take it and absorb some of it. You can have a business cycle like in 2008, but not necessarily. Even Knut Wicksell, he was not fully convinced about the Austrian theory of business cycle, because the Austrian theory of business cycle is capital expansion and lengthening of the production process becomes very complex, and it topples down like a house of cards. Wicksell, on the other hand, said not every business expands through time. Some of it just simply widens. I like to use the analogy of the soap factory. Maybe you just make more bars of soap and you don't engage in more complex, time-intensive means of production. You widen the production process. But still, interest rates being too low brings the economy at a less than optimal equilibrium. It also has a tremendous redistribution effect. And the Federal Reserve, they should know that. They should have read Wicksell, Knut Wicksell, and the early Swedes, the early Wickelsians. They all discussed the redistribution effect of too low interest rates. What should the interest rate be? As a guesstimate, we should see a Fed funds rate at 7% based on the Bureau of Labor and Statistics average profit rate. That's a guesstimate, don't quote me on that. If we had higher interest rates, the stock market would not balloon as high because people will have an option of putting money into a savings account or bonds. Savings will get shored up. True investment, prudent investment will expand, and society in general will get wealthier. So my point being, the Federal Reserve consistently, all central banks consistently underestimate the interest rate. An alternative would be such as the gold standard or free banking, which is another conversation. But they underestimate it because they don't understand the definition of the natural rate of interest. The natural rate of interest is simply the profit rate. This was explained by Henry Thornton, Knut Wicksell, and Frederick Hayek, as well as Mises. So I hope that clarifies that why there's a perpetuation of inequality in the United States, why it feels like we're working more and not getting wealthier, and why potentially we have an upcoming business cycle, but not necessarily, because the Federal Reserve hasn't read in detail Knut Wicksell. Maybe they've read one or two works, but he published over 800 works. Thank you very much.